July 30th, 1945. The Philippine Sea. The surface is calm, but the physics of the next 12 minutes will be absolute. The heavy cruiser Indianapolis is moving at 17 knots through the darkness. She is alone. She is unescorted. And she is about to become the subject of one of the most violent structural failures in naval history. At 15 minutes past midnight, a Japanese submarine designation I-58 fires a spread of torpedoes. The geometry of the intercept is perfect. The first weapon impacts the starboard bow. It does not just breach the hull, it severs the bow completely. 40 feet of hardened steel framing is instantly detached from the ship. The cruiser is still moving forward at 17 knots. Without a bow, the ship effectively becomes a giant scoop. Thousands of tons of seawater are forced into the forward bulkheads at high pressure. The kinetic energy of the ship is now working against it, driving the hull under the surface faster than the pumps can even cycle. The second torpedo strikes moments later. It hits amidships near the fuel tanks and the powder magazines. The resulting explosion is catastrophic. It severs the keel and knocks out the electrical grid. The ship loses all communications. There is no distress signal that can be verified. There is no power to the damage control central station. The hydraulic systems that power the turrets and the watertight doors are dead. The ship begins to list heavily to starboard. This is where the timeline becomes a mathematical impossibility for survival. A ship of this displacement usually takes hours to sink. Indianapolis takes 12 minutes. This is not a sinking, it is a sudden loss of buoyancy on a massive scale. The list increases so rapidly that the launch vectors for the lifeboats are useless. The boats on the high side cannot be lowered because they swing into the deck. The boats on the low side are already underwater. The men on board are not fighting a battle against an enemy navy. They are fighting a battle against gravity and hydrostatics. 1,195 men are trapped on a steel platform that is rotating 90 degrees and plunging toward the bottom. The violence of the movement is so extreme that it alters the structural integrity of the ship itself. As the cruiser rolls onto her beam ends, the laws of physics take over the heavy machinery. The forward gun turrets are held in place by gravity and heavy clips. As the cruiser rolls and plunges, the structure fails under forces far beyond its design limits. When the wreck is later mapped on the seabed, a critical detail stands out. The two forward main battery turrets are no longer attached to the hull. They lie separated on the bottom. Whether they were torn free during the descent, broken loose as the hull fractured, or detached on impact cannot be determined. What is clear is this: the ship did not sink as a single intact object. She broke apart under extreme energy. By minute 12, the stern rises vertical. The screws are exposed to the air for a brief second before the entire mass slides beneath the surface. The ocean rushes in to fill the void. The suction pulls debris and men down with the hull. Then the water settles. The silence returns. On the surface, there is nothing but a slick of fuel oil and hundreds of men treading water. No ship knows they are there. No port authority has marked them overdue. They have simply vanished from the strategic map. The heavy cruiser Indianapolis has begun her descent into the deep field. She is heading for a depth that is beyond the reach of 1945 technology. She is falling toward a seabed that will not be touched by human light for another 72 years. The hull is gone. The survivors are alone, and the mystery of where exactly the ship lies has just begun. The ocean has claimed the steel. Now it waits to see if it can claim the truth. 18,000 feet. This is the defining number of the Indianapolis wreck site. To put this vertical distance into perspective, it is significantly deeper than the resting place of the Titanic. It is a depth where the ambient pressure is high enough to compress distinct layers of matter into a solid mass. The Indianapolis did not just sink, she traveled to a different atmospheric reality. When a ship falls this far, it leaves the biological world of the surface and enters a zone of permanent stasis. The environment at 18,000 feet is hostile to life but perfect for preservation. The water temperature hovers just above freezing. The dissolved oxygen content is extremely low. These are the two primary catalysts for corrosion. Without heat and without oxygen, the chemical reaction that turns steel into rust is suspended. The biological consumption of wood and organic material slows to a near halt. This creates a forensic paradox. The violence of the impact destroys the structure, but the physics of the deep ocean preserve the pieces in high fidelity. Consider the starboard anchor as a primary example of this phenomenon. This is a heavy steel assembly forged to withstand the tension of a 10,000-ton warship pulling against the tide. We find it resting in the sediment on the bottom of the Pacific. It is not an anonymous block of rust. The preservation is so absolute that we can read the manufacturing history stamped into the metal. The words Norfolk Navy Yard are clearly legible on the fluke. We can see the date of manufacture. We can see the serial number. It looks as if it came out of the foundry last week rather than nearly 80 years ago. This is the signature of the deep, hostile environment. It acts as a museum vault. But this vault is locked behind a barrier of extreme physics. Salvage operations at 18,000 feet are logistically punishing. You are operating under a water column that weighs millions of tons. The darkness is total. The only light comes from the high-intensity banks on the remote vehicles. The signal latency between the surface ship and the robot makes real-time control difficult. You are flying a drone through a pitch-black canyon on the end of a fiber optic tether that is miles long. One mistake and the vehicle is lost. The seabed itself is a complication. It is a vast plain of soft sediment. When the hull struck the bottom, it hit with the terminal velocity of a freight train. The impact energy was absorbed by the mud, creating a crater that partially buries the lower hull. This creates a forensic challenge. We cannot see the keel. We cannot see the torpedo damage on the bottom of the hull because the earth has swallowed it. We can only interpret the wreckage that remains visible above the sediment line. For decades, this depth was the ultimate antagonist. The technology to reach 18,000 feet existed, but the technology to scan it efficiently did not. Early attempts to find the ship were searching blind. They were dropping sensors into a void without a reliable target. The Pacific Ocean is too large for random searching. If you do not have a precise starting point, the mathematics of the search grid will defeat you. You will run out of fuel and time before you cover even a fraction of the necessary ground. The wreck was protected by its own tragedy. Because the ship sank alone and without a distress call, the initial position reports were estimates based on dead reckoning. The historical record was vague. The Navy knew she was lost between Guam and Leyte, but that is a line stretching hundreds of miles. To find the steel needle in this haystack, the salvage teams needed to narrow the probability box. They needed to shrink the ocean. Until they could do that, the Indianapolis would remain where she was, buried in the dark, preserved by the cold, hidden by the crushing depth of the water column. 72 years. That is the duration of the silence. For more than 7 decades, the exact coordinates of the Indianapolis were a matter of speculation rather than science. The ocean floor does not give up secrets easily. Without a precise starting point, a search expedition is simply burning money and fuel. The Pacific is vast, and the sensors required to scan at 18,000 feet are slow. To find the ship, the salvage team needed to reset the clock. They needed a piece of data that had been overlooked since 1945. The breakthrough did not come from a sonar ping or a magnetic anomaly. It came from a library. A naval historian discovered a deck log from a completely different vessel. The landing ship tank designated LST-779. This ship had recorded a visual sighting of the Indianapolis 11 hours before the sinking. This single data point was the key. It proved that the cruiser was further west along her track than previously believed. The search box shifted. The area of probability collapsed from thousands of square miles down to a manageable grid. The mathematics of the search finally aligned with the capabilities of the technology. Enter the research vessel Petrel. This is not a standard salvage ship. It is a highly specialized deep ocean platform owned by Paul Allen. It carries a suite of autonomous underwater vehicles and remotely operated vehicles capable of withstanding the crushing pressure of the deep field. In August 2017, the team deployed their assets into the new search box. They were not looking for the hull immediately. They were looking for the debris field. When a ship breaks apart on the surface, it rains metal across the seabed. The heavier items fall straight down. The lighter items drift in the current. This creates a debris trail that acts as a breadcrumb path leading to the main wreck. The sensors on the autonomous vehicles began to paint a picture of the bottom. They used side-scan sonar to strip away the water and reveal the texture of the sediment. Then the return signal changed. It stopped showing the smooth monotony of the mud and started showing hard geometric edges, man-made angles. The remote-operated vehicle went down to investigate. The cameras revealed a scene of suspended animation. The debris field was not just a pile of scrap metal, it was a collection of preserved artifacts. This brings us to one of the most striking details of the entire expedition. The camera glided over a metal box lying in the sediment. It was a standard storage container for spare parts. In a shallow water wreck, this would be an unrecognizable lump of corrosion. At 18,000 feet, the preservation was so acute that the stencil paint was still white. The label on the box was perfectly legible. It read linchpins. This is the eerie precision of the deep forensic zone. You are looking at a box of mechanical fasteners that was stowed by a sailor in 1945. It sits there on the bottom of the world, looking exactly as it did on the day it was loaded. This level of detail confirms that the search is over. You are in the right place. But finding a box of pins is not the same as finding the ship. The debris field confirms the tragedy, but it does not confirm the identity. To prove this is the Indianapolis, the team needed to follow the trail of debris to the main structure. They needed to find the weapons and the hull number. The digital resurrection was beginning, but the final proof was still waiting in the dark. The debris field tells us that a ship died here, but the main hull tells us how it lived. As the remote-operated vehicle pushes out of the darkness and illuminates the superstructure, we are confronted with a logical paradox. We are looking at a machine that was structurally destroyed and yet remains operationally ready. The vessel lies broken in two distinct sections, but the weaponry is locked in a state of high alert. This creates a jarring contrast between the violence of the sinking and the discipline of the crew. The first weapons to emerge from the gloom are the heavy anti-aircraft guns. These are the 5-inch 25 caliber batteries. They are the dual-purpose workhorses of the World War II fleet. On the wreck of the Indianapolis, they are pointing skyward. The elevation mechanisms are intact. The barrels are not drooping. They are trained on an enemy that is no longer there. The preservation is so acute that if you look down the muzzle of the gun, you can still see the rifling grooves inside the barrel. The steel has resisted the corrosion of the deep ocean to a degree that defies expectation. It looks as if the gun captain could step back into the seat and resume fire control. But the true mechanical ghost story is found on the smaller mounts, the 40mm Bofors guns. These were the rapid-fire weapons designed to shred incoming aircraft. On most shipwrecks, the ammunition lockers are closed or the ready racks are empty. The Indianapolis is different. As the camera zooms in on the breech block of the 40mm mount, we see a detail that chills the blood. The guns are loaded. There are 4 round clips of 40mm ammunition still sitting in the feed trays. The brass casings are visible. The warheads are pointed down the barrel. This is a forensic detail that speaks volumes about the final moments of the ship. It implies that the weapon systems were manned, or at a minimum kept in a condition of immediate readiness. The ship did not sink in a safe harbor. She sank in a war zone with her teeth bared. The clips have remained in that position for more than 7 decades, held in place by the mechanical friction of the loader and the immense pressure of the water column. It is a frozen snapshot of potential kinetic energy that was never released. However, this readiness stands in stark contrast to the structural reality of the hull. While the guns are intact, the ship itself has suffered a catastrophic amputation. The sonar mapping reveals that the bow is missing. The entire forward section of the cruiser is detached. It lies separated from the main wreckage. This confirms the survivor testimony of the torpedo impact. The first weapon severed the structural spine of the ship. The paradox is complete. You have a main battery that is ready to fight and a hull that is physically incapable of staying afloat. The engineering failure was not in the systems, but in the structure itself. The mapping of the hull reveals the extent of the trauma. The breakpoint is ragged. The steel plating is twisted outward, indicating the force of the internal stresses as the bow tore away. The main hull hit the bottom with such force that it created an impact crater, pushing the keel deep into the sediment. The stern is crumpled. The flight deck is collapsed. Yet amidst this absolute destruction, the 40mm guns hold their ammunition. They are the silent witnesses to the discipline of a crew that maintained their station even as the floor dropped out from under them. We now have the debris, we have the heavy weapons, we have the class identification. The gun layout confirms this is a Portland-class heavy cruiser, but in the world of naval salvage, class identification is not enough. There were 2 ships in this class. To close the file and legally identify the wreck, the team needs a specific number. They need the hull designation. Without it, this is just a generic tragedy. With it, the wreck becomes a named war grave. The robot must leave the guns and move to the hull itself to find the only proof that matters. The probability of paint adhering to steel after a 3-mile plunge through the water column is statistically near zero. When a vessel sinks, it is subjected to immense friction as it passes through the layers of the ocean. The impact with the bottom usually strips away external coatings. Then the salt water begins the chemical process of exfoliation. Over 7 decades, the paint should flake off, leaving only bare rusted metal. This is the standard model of shipwreck decay. But the Indianapolis defies the standard model. As the remote vehicle maneuvers around the severed bow section, the lights illuminate the starboard side of the hull. The gray steel is covered in a layer of silt, but underneath the sediment, the visual data is shocking. The paint is not just present, it is distinct. The camera reveals a massive 2-digit number painted in white with a black drop shadow. 3-5. This is the definitive moment of the expedition. There is no ambiguity. This is hull number 35, the heavy cruiser Indianapolis. The sight of the number changes the nature of the operation. It shifts from a search for a debris field to a visitation of a specific named entity. The preservation of the paint is due to the extreme depth. At 18,000 feet, the water is so stagnant that the abrasive forces of current are negligible. The paint is locked in a chemically inert vacuum. We can see the white star of the United States Navy on the deck. We can see the delineation lines between the camouflage patterns. The ship is wearing the same face she wore when she left Tinian. The identification is confirmed, but the survey continues. The team moves aft to the debris field to locate the ceremonial heart of the ship. In naval tradition, the bell is the soul of the vessel. It is used to mark time and to signal the presence of the captain. On a wreck of this violence, finding a bell is rare. Finding two is almost unheard of. The remote vehicle cameras pick out a shape in the mud. It is the large ship's bell. It is lying on its side, half buried in the sediment. The bronze is tarnished but intact. However, the interior of the bell is clogged with the seabed itself. It is a mute object, grounded and silent. But nearby, there is a second discovery that is far more eerie. Hanging from a vertical stanchion is the smaller watch bell. Unlike its larger counterpart, this bell did not fall into the mud. It remained attached to its mount. It hangs freely in the water column, suspended in the darkness, just as it was on the surface. It looks as if a sailor could reach out and strike it. The clapper is still in place. This small bronze object survived the torpedo impact, the magazine explosion, the breaking of the hull, and the crash into the bottom without dislodging. It is a testament to the build quality of the mounting hardware and the strange selective violence of the sinking event. The visual confirmation of hull number 35 and the recovery of the visual data on the bells closes the loop on the identity question. There is no doubt remaining. The wreck has been positively identified, and the location is now a matter of record. But as the cameras pan across the bridge structure, they reveal one final detail that shifts the focus from the machine to the men. We have found the steel, but the steel bears the marks of the crew's final victory before the disaster. The paint on the bridge tells a story of the war that ended 72 years ago. The ship is dead, but the score she kept is still visible. The mechanical destruction of the Indianapolis took exactly 12 minutes. The physiological destruction of her crew took nearly 100 hours. This is the brutal asymmetry of the disaster. The ship failed quickly, but the men died slowly. When the stern slipped beneath the surface at 18,000 feet, it took approximately 300 sailors down with the hull. These men were trapped in the engineering spaces or the lower decks. Their war ended instantly. But for the 900 men who went into the water, the war had just shifted into a new phase. They were floating in the middle of the Pacific Ocean without fresh water, without food, and largely without life rafts. They faced dehydration, hypothermia, and predatory shark attacks for 4 full days. There was no rescue signal. No aircraft knew where to look. By the time the casual flight of a patrol plane spotted the oil slick, the number of living men had dropped precipitously. Out of the 1,195 men who departed Tinian, only 316 survived to see the end of the war. The attrition rate was 74%. The wreck at the bottom of the Philippine Sea is the final container for this tragedy. It is the tomb for the hundreds who never made it out of the hull. This brings us to the most poignant detail discovered in the debris field. The remote vehicle illuminated a section of the bridge structure that had torn away during the sinking. On the gray steel plate, there is a row of painted symbols. They are small, red, rising sun flags. These are the kill markings, the combat scoreboard of the vessel. Even after 72 years of immersion and the violent trauma of the impact, the paint is vivid. We can clearly count 9 distinct flags. These symbols represent the enemy aircraft and vessels destroyed by the gunnery crews of the Indianapolis during her service across the Pacific theater. It is a frozen piece of military history, a defiant ledger of success that persists even after the total loss of the ship. The red paint against the gray steel stands out as a visual reminder that this was a predator long before it became a victim. This discovery creates a complex legacy. The Indianapolis is often remembered solely for her loss and the shark attacks that followed. But the physical evidence on the seabed proves she was a highly effective combat unit until the very moment of her death. The 9 kill flags and the loaded Bofors guns tell the story of a ship that maintained discipline and lethality. The disposition of the wreck reflects this status. The Indianapolis is not a resource to be mined, it is a sovereign piece of United States Navy territory. Under the Sunken Military Craft Act, the wreck is protected from unauthorized disturbance. There will be no recovery of the bell, there will be no salvage of the steel for low background radiation sensors. There will be no raising of the hull. The physics of lifting a 10,000-ton object from 18,000 feet are technically possible but ethically forbidden. The expedition that found her was a survey mission, not a salvage operation. They mapped the site, they verified the identity, and they captured the images that proved the condition of the hull. Then they left. The lights of the robots turned off and the darkness returned. The heavy cruiser remains exactly where she landed in 1945. She sits upright on the bottom of the world, her guns trained out, and her kill flags visible on the debris. She guards the crew that remains with her. The mystery of her location is solved, but the silence of the deep field is permanent.